Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Social Housing Roundtable. It's lovely to see so many people with us already today. We're expecting a really busy session, so it's great to see so many people able to join us for what should be a really interesting discussion. To those who I've not met before, to those who haven't joined the roundtable before, my name is Matt Baird. I know a few people have joined since I spoke at CIH Brighton last week, so it's lovely to have you with us. The Social Housing Roundtable was set up during the pandemic. The idea was to bring people together during a time where we couldn't get together and share ideas and best practice quite so easily, and has grown into this community now of, well, we've got 860 something people on the mailing list, which is amazing. We've had nearly 500 people join various sessions this year already. And the idea is to have really true, authentic conversations that we can't always have at conferences because there isn't always time for Q&A. I'm just going to mute a couple of people just a second. We haven't always got time for the Q&A element. We haven't always got time to really deep dive into the session. So it's about inviting people along to discuss anything and everything in the sector. And we've got more than 100 episodes now up on YouTube and Spotify if you want to catch up on any of the previous recordings. Day to day, I'm a recruiter, so I've been recruiting in social housing for over 11 years. And my, I guess, request and favour that I ask of everybody who joins, the reason this stays free and open to everybody is because of my recruitment business. So the more of you that use me for your recruitment, the longer I can keep this going for free. So do please reach out if you're looking to hire staff in the social housing space. Enough from me for now. I'm actually going to pass it over to Kelly. So today's session is sponsored by Alertical, and Alertical I've worked with them on and off on a few projects over the last few years, and they do an awful lot of amazing work in the older people services community. But I wanted to make sure that we got a really kind of vast knowledge and experience that came with us to the table through their sponsorship this year. And so I'm delighted to welcome Kelly Scapens. So Kelly is going to talk about how they have improved through various means communication with older residents and how that has led to better service delivery. But I will pass over to Kelly to introduce her expertise for today. To those who are new to the roundtable, we'll have about 15-20 minutes with Kelly, where she'll introduce a number of ideas and thought topics, etc. Do feel free to put any points you like in the chat. After that, there will be a good open discussion for about half an hour or more, deep diving into some of the themes that come out. So without further ado, Kelly, I'll pass over to you.
Thank you very much. Morning, everybody. So I'm Kelly Scapens. I am the supported housing manager at ForHousing. So ForHousing are a landlord of social housing based in the Northwest. We've got about 22,000 homes, mixture of obviously general needs. We have a number of sheltered schemes for older people and also extra care schemes. So although they are not specifically for older people, as the age range starts at 18, in the main, most people are older. So my role is managing the sheltered housing schemes for ForHousing. So we have around about 1,200 tenants who live across 16 schemes. However, I'm probably the go-to person in the organisation if there is anything with regards to older people, because I'm sure, as you're aware, that although lots of older people live in what you'd maybe call specialised accommodation, probably 80–90% of older people live within general needs homes. So I think this sort of engagement in general is not just about people living in specified older persons accommodation. So I suppose just a bit of background for me. I have quite a lengthy career in social care. We're supporting teams to deliver services to people with learning disabilities and autism, and moved into housing about 8 or 9 years ago now. And I think one thing that is just really key in anything that we do is ensuring that we're delivering services that are tenant-focused, person-centred, about individuals. So whether that be an older person, younger person, anywhere in between really, it doesn't actually matter. Engagement is important regardless. However, I think when you think of older people, there are potentially factors that need to be considered when considering how to engage. I think obviously engagement is really sort of high on the agenda and the current drivers with the new TSMs and the community consumer standards, and I suppose it's considering how engagement works with a group of people who may not engage typically as maybe a younger generation. And that might be a sweeping generalization, because as I found, there are 80 and 90-year-olds who could probably work their way around IT and any sort of digital systems far better than somebody who is in their mid-30s, 40s. So I think whenever we're having conversations today, we've got to bear in mind that we make a lot probably assumptions about older people and how they want to engage or not want to engage. So I think that it's always having the back of your mind really about that sort of tenant focus. Everybody's an individual and there's always got to be options and how engagement works. So I suppose why I'm here today is because I've been working with our tenants across our sheltered schemes, or supported housing as we call it within ForHousing, to look at how we can help older residents shape the services that they participate in and have. So we hold, in addition to our sort of tenant forums that are run for anybody who would like to attend, we also have a designated supported housing forum, which is a representation of people who are living in our older persons schemes. We found that with regards to engagement, it's a better forum to have a like-minded group of people who are living within similar accommodation to identify really what they want out of services. So as an example, we have taken documentation and letters that we have sent to individuals or we're planning to send to individuals to ensure that was easily understood and taken on board feedback from those groups. We have talked about things that are sort of key for older people. So as an example, cost of living crisis obviously is high on the agenda for everybody. But one of the things that was noted by my team, but also through the forum, was there was lots and lots of initiatives that were being publicised via digital means, like the Iceland vouchers, etc., that people were not aware of because they didn't have access to social media. Or maybe don't have family who have access to social media to pass that on. So we worked together to produce a cost-saving leaflet that we shared with all our tenants, both digitally but also in paper as well. So we've done a lot of sort of work with understanding what people want out of services, and that core group of people are quite instrumental in sort of feeding ideas through into kind of what's next for the future. So if anybody in the room does work within sort of older persons accommodation, I'm sure you'll probably agree that there's a change in face of kind of individuals who want to live in accommodation that is specifically for older people. And that can cause both positives, but also can cause some conflicts between those people who have lived there and traditionally access maybe a warden service back in the day where there was living wardens. So it's trying to sort of, I suppose, move forward and modernise a service whilst ensuring we're taking on board the views of those people who live there. And so I suppose that's, the main thing is, how do you actually find out what people want? And the very straightforward thing is obviously to ask them. However, I think the way that we sometimes ask people is not maybe how people might typically communicate. So if a survey is sent out via text, somebody doesn't have a smartphone or doesn't use text, then obviously it's tricky. We have digital surveys, which again, some people will happily access, but some people won't. We also do phone surveys, and in Extra Care, we specifically ask people for feedback rather than sending out questionnaires, because people might need a family member or an advocate to help them sort of feed information through to us. I think, like I say, the changing population is a challenge within older persons accommodation. I think linked to that, there is a challenge. There's an ageing population across general needs stock. So how do you engage with those individuals? It's it's more straightforward if there is a group of people of a similar age or an age range that live within the same accommodation. But how then do you engage those people who may not use digital means, as an example, who live in a general needs stock? I think there is then, if you think about how to engage with people, there is that generational difference. People's thought processes, people's opinions of the world and how it should work. I was at a tenants meeting yesterday and I was asked, can we stop young men moving into their scheme because they need some women to play bingo with. So as you can imagine, that's kind of a challenge during allocations, but obviously we can't put bingo down as a requirement to move into older person's accommodation. But I think again, potentially having, or there's the risk of assuming or making assumptions about engaging with older people. So I just spoke about that digitalization, etc. There are many, many people who are on that journey with us. There are many, many people who aren't. So I think part of the engagement within older person services is how do we educate people to understand the world is changing so that they don't get left behind. So as an example, the digital switchover. And regardless of whether people live in schemes, it's about saying, do you know that your telephone's going to change? Because people get letters in the post and obviously either don't read them or don't understand. So I think that there is lots of different ways to engage with people. We've had the benefit of having scheme-based staff still at our supported housing schemes. I know some providers do, some providers don't. And I think that that is a real bonus for those people who typically want to communicate face-to-face. However, that then becomes a challenge if you don't have the luxury of staff, I suppose, or the ability to access staff members. I think we, our contact centre, are trained to obviously deal not only with older people, but vulnerable people in general. So do have sort of a wealth of understanding and empathy when people do contact our service centre. So I think there's engagement, there's formal engagement with regards to surveys and asking people's opinions, but also there is that engagement when people just generally reach out to us as an organisation. So I think that's something to consider as well, to ensure as the world changes, that is considered within sort of an organisation's plan on how you continue to engage. Not again, and it doesn't really apply to just older people. I think it applies to anybody who may struggle with different forms of communication. And I think the most important thing really is ensuring that you actually listen to what people say. I think it's taking on board. There is a change in picture in the housing sector. And I often get comments like, in 1976, this is what we did. And I was like, but lots of things have changed in 1976 and kind of this is where we are now. And although it's respecting the history, because people have a lot of history with a changing face, not only obviously of their lives, where they live, their family dynamics, their community. It's respecting that, but I think it's always about making sure that you don't make promises that you can't keep. So I know that well, the conversations I was having yesterday very much was, we want a staff member here 9 till 5, Monday to Friday, and we want the same person sitting in the office at all that time. And I was like, well, that's fine. But if that was their job, then they wouldn't be the coordinator of the service and they wouldn't be sort of supporting you with your health and well-being. They would be a receptionist. And that's not a service that, well, obviously can be funded by a housing benefit, but also it's not a service that we as a housing provider want to offer. We want to enhance somebody's well-being whilst ensuring sort of housing related needs are met. So I think there is always a challenge in the differences of opinions between those people who live in a communal setting. I think you also have that challenge if it is general needs accommodation with a mix of the tenants and residents who live within a block. So you might have an 18-year-old living next door to a 90-year-old. They may be the best of friends. They may be the worst of enemies, and you will never know that because people are people until that happens. And I suppose what we found sort of, following the pandemic was the engagement with us as an organisation was so important for people, because actually some people don't have anybody in their lives apart from their landlord. And people would reach out to us to help, guide, advise. And I think that helped us shape what we then did after the pandemic, and the importance of having access to people who are there to offer that that additional support, or to be able to signpost somebody to the relevant organisation or agency. And I think ultimately, people are people, regardless of whether they're older or not. Everybody should be treated with respect. Everybody should be listened to. And I don't mean just, I suppose, it's active listening, so that actually you're going to do something about it. And if you're not going to do something about it, explain why you can't, but what can you do to figure out sort of a way forward to help people achieve what they feel is important to them. And if there's not a two-way conversation, you're never going to get that feedback. So open, honest, transparent conversations. And I think it's that, deliver your promises, do what it says on the tin. So because if you don't, people don't trust you. And I think if you lose the trust of an older person, especially, I think it's extremely difficult to regain that trust. I also think as well, if you are working with older people and your organisation have let them down for whatever reason it may be, so whether a repair hasn't been completed on time, or they've had a poor interaction maybe with the rents team, or whatever it is, that trust is lost very quickly, and you can be on the receiving end of that mistrust. So you've got to forge those sort of positive relationships to help that engagement with anybody, if I'm honest. But as this is based around older people, I think you have to make sure that you develop that with older people, and take time to listen, because I think sometimes people don't have that opportunity to share their thoughts and feelings, and sometimes it may not actually be about their housing situation, but you then know that next time you ask the question about their housing situation, you might get an honest answer, because you spent the time to speak to that person for 10, 15 minutes, an hour, whatever it may be, the time before. So I suppose that's a bit about me and sort of what we've done. I think there were some questions, Matt, wasn't there?
There's already some stuff coming through, which is interesting, and I'm going to raise those now. I mean, I think one of the points that came up for me was something you mentioned just before we jumped on, which was that 80% of older people live in general needs, and so this idea of having older people services being almost kind of labeling, well, all older people are the same, like as soon as you get to a certain age. And I think we've moved so much beyond that as a mindset within the sector, but we're still working through some of that. So a question that come through from Steve. Steve has said, you've mentioned digital, paper and phone surveys. Have you tried face-to-face meetings or door knocking? How do you approach those with extra needs, such as learning difficulties, English as a second language, etc.? And what I will say, just before Kelly comes in, if anyone would like to raise their point in person, please feel free to use the reactions tab at the bottom of the screen and use the raise hand function, and I will bring you in. But Kelly, over to you on that one.
So we do, so we have staff on site. So like I say, we're lucky enough to have that kind of face-to-face interaction. We hold monthly scheme meetings within our schemes. And then I hold a manager's drop-in once a quarter. I find that with sort of that engagement with our scheme meetings and the actual drop-ins, it's very interesting. So I do alternate quarters, and then the two people that I line manage, who are also managers, do the alternate quarters. But you will often find that when they do their sessions, they don't have anybody turn up. But when I do my sessions, because the hierarchy is perceived by individuals, I can fix things, I have a massive turnout, which I always find really interesting, because I always say to people is, whatever you ask me now, I'm going to go and ask the team and they'll help me sort it out. So I haven't got a magic wand to fix things. I'm going to go and do the same things the team would. So holding that up to their, so holding that information until I turn up is really quite interesting. I think with those people obviously got additional needs, it's understanding a communication style. So when we may deliver, as an example, the rent statement, those people, who've got additional needs, we would actually go through those with people. Now, again, that would be within a scheme, that wouldn't be out in the general needs sort of population. And I think, again, that's your challenge there. So if you've got specifically trained staff, I suppose, who's delivering a service, it's very different from a neighbourhood officer who may be having 1,500 tenants who they're seeing. We have obviously English is a second language, so we use translators to help us translate, and we have just implemented a British Sign Language interpreter service, because we felt that was a real sort of blocker for us, for those people who use BSL, and not just in again the specialist accommodation, across our general needs population, where we weren't communicating well with tenants that were using BSL. So I think it's been creative, it's been innovative, in regards to how you communicate. We have easy read documents that we use. So we have easy read guides to our tenancy. We're in the process of producing one for our antisocial behaviour, so that people can sort of understand so what they need to do, and how we can help as well.
And I think you mentioned before, again, when we caught up before, you've said that it's about offering different solutions. You've got digital, but you also still do paper offerings and those kind of things. But trying to get those in general needs, it suddenly seems you can't put up a poster, like that's not okay. But in older people's services, it is, because of our own, I guess, thoughts and judgments on how people perceive information.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, again, that's really straightforward when you have a team that's obviously, I suppose, dedicated to provide that service. So if there's any kind of, change in the organisation, I'm always on this going, yeah, so we need a poster for that, please. Yes, brilliant. Put it all over Facebook, YouTube, wherever. But ultimately, we need something we can stick in our scheme so people can see that. And again, it's about knowing it's not a one size fits all. You can't sheep dip people. So regardless of whether you're an older person or not, that doesn't really make a difference. So if you're a visual person and you need pictures and videos to help you understand that information, you need that information regardless of whether, again, you're 18 or 80, doesn't really make a difference.
If I have something, we said before, if I have something come through on my phone, I'll look at that later and I'll forget. If there's a constant poster there, I'm going to go, oh yeah, I need to do that. I need to do that. That's not because it's older, younger person services. That's just service provision. But we've moved away. We've obviously we need to go digital for a lot of things, but there's still an element of finding the balance between the two. And there's some digital solutions which are amazing, which we'll come on to shortly, but there's others that we also still need to do the basics. James, I'm going to bring you in. Thank you for being patient, and then I'll go to some of the points raised in the chat. But James, good to have you with us today.
Hi, hello there. Hi, Matt. By the way, well done at Brighton. I wanted to say good morning, Kelly.
Morning.
My question is, at the Housing Association I'm with, it's called Taurus Social Housing, one of the biggest in the Northwest. Now, I suggested that they install a system called ReachStack, which gives secondary language skills, but also encompasses for people with dyslexia and learning differences. Is that something that you have? I know you've got the sign language one, but would that be something that might benefit your organisation, do you feel?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, we're always, equity, diversity, inclusion, we're always looking for, any sort of solution really that will help support tenants, regardless of their age, to communicate with us well. And I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head in regards to if somebody can't tell us information because of their difference, whatever that difference may be, then we need to consider how do we actually help that person engage with us as an organisation. And that's not necessarily just about giving feedback, but that's about a simple thing as reporting a repair. So yeah, I'd be really interested to find out more about that, James. Yeah.
And the other thing is the housing officers. Are you doing extra training with them now in terms of signing and neurodiversity needs and things like that?
Yeah, so we do.
And how are they managing?
Yeah, so we've got we do training for British Sign Language that we offer. I think that the difficulty with any sort of language that you learn is you've got to use it to keep it fresh and and make sure that kind of like you keep those skills. But I think the basics just really help that initial communication with somebody that might use British Sign Language. I mean, I did training many years ago, and I can still remember how to sign my name. And a gentleman who uses BSL, and I obviously introduced myself. Yeah. Yeah. And he was, he was like, wow, he was like, thank you, because obviously it's it's a big thing, isn't it? And it's a very sort of it's really important to talk to people in the way they want to be spoken to. So we do additional training. We take off opportunities from local authority training courses, but also we also put on training courses where there may be a relative a relative need. So emotional personality disorder, as an example, is a massive area for us at the minute for some of the projects that we're doing. So it may not necessarily be about older people, but actually it's really important that we've got a greater understanding of how we support people, but understand people as well.
I had 30 years as a care worker and support worker, so I know exactly where you're coming from. Thanks very much indeed, Kelly. Okay, thank you.
Nice to meet you, James.
Thanks, man.
No, good to have you with us, James. I remember, look, thanks for the kind words about Brighton. That's very kind of you. Something that stuck with me, I think, from last week in particular. I've never liked the term hard to reach, and I'm glad you didn't mention it in your intro, Kelly. And I was talking with Lee Blair, and he turned around and said, "There's no such thing as hard to reach. There's just difficult to access." And it's flipping that narrative on its head. So it's not that customers are hard to reach; it's that customers don't have. It's a difficult to access system for whatever it might be, and it's why we're looking at so many different options. But also, and I think it ties back into what you said before about that trust piece. If people have been trying to get help for a long time and going, why would I engage now? There's no point. I've tried before. It's getting nowhere. And those things do stick. And it's that story, isn't it, of bad news travels 5 times quicker than good news. And it's completely true within the services we deliver. And I guess it ties a little bit into that next question, which has been set by Emma, which was, do you think that the older people in general needs are more open to use technology if it helps them stay in their current homes?
I think it depends on the person, if I'm honest. I think aging in place, ideally that would be what we want for. I know that's what I want for myself. I'm sure you and loved ones. I think the challenge in social housing is lots of maybe older people who were living in their current homes may now be living in 2 or 3 bedroom properties, but families have grown up and moved on. So that's a challenge as a housing provider when there's a housing crisis that you need and you want to help people be living in the right sized homes. I think that if somebody is willing to consider technology, I think it does help. Personally, thanks, and from personal experience, I think it helps somebody live in their home longer, but it depends on how much somebody will engage with that. I think it's how you actually share the information with somebody. I think it's how you deliver the benefit it will give. I was giving Matt an example when we were setting up the session. So we were introducing a new system, and I was talking about the hash key. And we had a scheme that was trialing it. There was a mixture of people there. And I think so. We're talking about, so you press this button and it's the hash key. And this gentleman, he was 97, and he came, he said, Kelly, I think it's a brilliant idea. Can't wait to try it. Brilliant. However, what's the hash key? So straight away, I was like, oh, I hadn't even thought. So language that is so usable in modern worlds, I just hadn't thought. So in the next presentations that I did, when I said it says a hash key, I had a piece of paper with a hash key on, and I showed everybody what it was. And if that guy hadn't given me that feedback, I would have gone through 16 presentations or conversations more than anything and not share that information. So do you think it's about how you sell the information? I think one of the things about technology is a lot of the technology that is traditional older people's technology looks like older people's technology. And bearing in mind, and I don't know for those of you who may deliver older person services, 55 plus is the age banding for our sheltered schemes that's set by the local authority where we work. If anybody describes me at 55 as old, there will be trouble, because it's not. And if I'm honest, the lady I was talking to yesterday, who's 85, if I described her as living in an older person's scheme, she probably would have chased me out of her home. So I think kind of when we're using language, we've got to think about that connotation and is how you feel. So I think, you know, saying to somebody, oh, if you use this piece of equipment, it'll help you maintain your independence. What does that mean? I want to be able to go to the pub with my mates and I want to be able to cook my own food and make a cup of tea. That's all I want in my life. I don't care about independence because what does that mean to me? So I think it's finding that that connection with somebody, if you're talking about technology, that will help.
This episode of the Social Housing Roundtable is sponsored by Alertical. Alertical helps as many people as possible feel safe, connected and informed by combining ingenious technology and award-winning human contact. Alertical's digital engagement solution helps social landlords proactively know their customers and properties by putting a portable touchscreen in every home, offering a daily property check through the optional OK Each Day service, plus repairs reporting, tenant surveys and much more. They also provide Beyond Warden Calls, an easier, simpler and lower cost wireless warden call solution with video door entry, dispersed telecare and smoke alarms. Alertical works with over 60 housing providers across the UK to enhance two-way engagement between customers and landlords. In 2022, Alertical won the Queen's Award for Enterprise and Innovation, and in 2023 won Housing Supplier of the Year. I'm delighted to have them as our sponsor of the Social Housing Roundtable throughout 2024. I think it's a really, really important point. And also in a world where more and more people are living to 80, 90 and beyond, we're saying, right, well, a third of your life, you're now old. And it's absolutely wild. There's a question, before I come to you, James, there's the question that came in the chat, which was, Kelly, do you have training in place for new starters or current staff and customer service team to understand and address the unique needs of older adults, including effective communication with the person, especially with stuff like dementia? I think this is something where, again, when we're not just talking about tech, but it comes into it, which is that, I guess that reminder to engage, isn't it? Sometimes is sometimes the difficult part, but also that accessibility. You know, dementia's horrifying, but it's something that is now unfortunately becoming more and more commonplace.
And I think I'll probably go back to the earlier point of it's really, really straightforward when you live somewhere where there may be people that you see. So I think there's something about being able to identify a change in need in somebody, if somebody is deteriorating, but also knowing how you can communicate well with people when they live in maybe a specific sort of setting, like an extra care scheme as an example. I think that it is a challenge for general needs. I think that you may find that there'll be people who don't know somebody has dementia. I suppose, how would you find out? Maybe frequent contacts, maybe contacts that are confusing. So if somebody's rang up to report a repair and then half an hour later they're phoning up to report a repair and then half an hour later they're phoning up to report the same repair. We often find obviously that family members are liaise on behalf of the individual or access services to help that person stay in their own home. Again, that's very straightforward to know if you've got people around or you've had an interaction. We do dementia awareness training. All our team, including our operatives, are trained in safeguarding. So if they see anything that's concerning or worrying, they would feed that back to our neighbourhoods team so we could pick that up. Obviously, they wouldn't feel able to have those conversations, but if they're concerned about somebody, they would feed that in. But I think it's a challenge across the board, really. And not to kind of go into this in too much in depth, but obviously, the social care system is struggling massively to meet demand, not only from people who have dementia, but people who have care needs in general. So I think there's always the risk that the housing provider becomes that support provider when it's not their statutory duty to do so. And I think it's so key to ensure that as a landlord, regardless of whether you hold a supportive role or not, your role still remains as a landlord. Otherwise, we're sort of backfilling gaps of a potentially, a fractured system. And I think, again, that's a massive challenge, because ultimately people who work in housing, or anywhere really that work with people, you're there, you do it because you care, you want to make a difference, you want to you know, to help people live the lives they want. And I think it's very easy to want to step in and try and solve those issues. But I think it's essential to make sure that you have that clear definition, that clear line between services. We often have, well, you can just do that. No, actually we can't. And there's
it's an ongoing problem, particularly when it comes to staffing and burnout and everything that follows on from a recruitment side, is people being asked to do so much more than their job description, because there aren't, as you say, there's too many gaps in the system. James, I'm going to bring you back in.
Thanks. Right. Okay. With regards to that, Kelly, everything you said and above and beyond, I was actually invited, you know, to be part of the study group for, you know, the CIH and NHF when they were looking at the review of the social, you know, the housing review there. And one of the things I said was pretty much what you're just saying there now, about going back to the basics of the bricks and mortar and signposting, providing affordable homes. Signposting. Having worked 30 odd years in nursing care, I know very simple. First lesson of communications, keep it simple, stupid. Secondly, pictograms come in very useful. I worked for a number of years with a couple of guys living in as a support worker. They both were on the Asperger spectrum and had autism. So I worked alongside that. Several years with the Jewish Blind Society. So as blind people I was looking after, some had been in the actual concentration camps. But all of those people that you look at, you might think to yourselves, oh, well, because they're of that age group, they're not all going to be on a position of dementia, or indeed vascular dementia, you know, with the abilities. My father himself, he was 80 odd and he was still writing every week for the question and answers which he compiled for the Mirror, for the Mail. And he used to write answer all the questions. And he was 80 odd when he started to first use the computer. But he soon adapted to it. But even if you look at the keyboard, this is the point to think about. The QWERTY keyboard is the same as on the typewriter, isn't it? You know, with the typewriter, the initial. So really, we've advanced, yes, but there's still that there. So if people, like you very rightly say, speak to people more and listen to what the needs are and get behind the doors, and I think that's it, really. I don't know.
I think as well, there's something about so you know, as people who deliver a service, is how we interact. I think where the challenge becomes as well is how do you support tenants who live with other tenants in their own flats, obviously, to welcome and engage with people who may have differences. So I'll give you sort of a real life example. So we have a scheme, the 60 plus flats, really welcoming scheme. Really look out for people when they're struggling. So people have dementia, might change in need. And we were approached to ask to support a gentleman who had autism and additional needs. Would we offer a property? And we're like, do you know what? Yeah, absolutely. So we had support workers that came in morning and evening, had somebody to sleep in. And because he didn't communicate typically, the older residents within the scheme believed he was a risk to them. And instead of embracing him, pushed him away. So that then led to a breakdown, unfortunately, of that particular housing placement of this individual. We found him somewhere else, and he's very happy with that. But, you know, nothing to do with him whatsoever, but he was a gentleman that was 6'5". Quite a larger gentleman. He used to do walking, so he was very sort of stocky. And I've challenged the residents who claim that he worries them to say, so if this was Betty, who was 5 foot nothing and had dementia, would you feel the same? Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. But do you though? Because actually, Joan, who lives upstairs, you go and help her come to coffee morning, you go out and do her shopping, you make sure 3 times a day that she's all right, because you know that your daughter doesn't come till tea time. So what's the difference? So I think a challenge not only sometimes is our perception of what older people is, but older people's perception of people around them. And I think that's something that is about open communication and trying to sort of very gently challenge those opinions. But some people's opinions are their opinions, and I think it's very hard to sort of move people away from that as well. So
yeah, Kelly, the other thing, of course, don't forget is that when you go in to become a housing officer, that's exactly what you're going in for. If you're going to go in for nursing, you do nursing, social work, social work. So now to expect them to pick up the slack for the government and be expected without any change in job description, no change in job specifications, to come into work and suddenly find they're doing more work and being told they're supposed to be happy about it because they're doing all this training and it's going to improve their feelings of themselves, of betterment and feeling contentment. I think that's the thing. So many people are going into homes now who really haven't got the skills or the abilities, and lines are getting crossed and misjudged. And it isn't the poor housing officers' fault.
But that's a huge recruitment piece as well, and that's a
Isn't it?
massive underfunding arena, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And the problem you have on the flip side of it is that people who go into housing are often people who want to help. And so if they
True.
can see areas where help is needed and it isn't going to be funded elsewhere, they will naturally pick up the slack. And we've
Yes.
unfortunately developed a system where that has been exacerbated to the point of people are burning out, and yet those services still haven't been picked up, like you say, largely due to funding.
Yeah.
Question which come in from Susan Kelly. Do you invite organisations to promote local services such as how to access the food bank or use the local social supermarket, as many can feel a stigma, but often they are some of the very people who should be accessing such services?
yeah, so we promote our local organisations. Obviously, to all our residents, tenants, whoever
I
they
guess that
are.
question's almost around how you engage that, isn't it? Sometimes
Yeah.
it's sometimes the challenge.
And we've recently had feedback from a number of tenants. So we do a wellbeing review with somebody on an annual basis, and it's just how are you doing? Is there anything we can help with? Do we need to signpost you anywhere, etc.? And one of the sections that we look at is finances. So it's not about understanding how much money somebody's coming in or anything like that, but are you struggling? Cost of living, everything's gone up for everybody. Have you got any debts you want to talk about? We have money advice teams, internal money advice teams. For some people, they might be looking for work, because that's another thing as well, is the assumption is an older person doesn't work. Well, I know many people who are 75 plus who are still in full-time employment for some people, and the feedback we've had recently from a number of tenants is, why are people asking me about my money? And it's not that we're asking people about their money, we're asking people about, do you need sort of any signposting anywhere, or any sort of advice or guidance about how you can ensure you can maximize your benefits. On the flip side of that, we've had some massive positives with regards to the pension credit campaign, where people hadn't realised that they could claim lots of money. People then who were getting free glasses and free TV licenses. I think somebody was like £3,000 better off.
Wow.
So I think it's really important about accessing those services out there. We've also recently set up a new tenant support service, which is funded by Housing Benefit for the first 12 months of somebody's tenancy. And that is an hour of support a week. And that could be anything to help somebody set up their tenancy. And I think as an organisation, the assumption had been that probably it was only younger people that would access that, maybe people who'd not never lived in their own homes, etc. And the first person that joined the service was an 85-year-old lady who had private let her whole life. And the landlord had sold the home, so she became homeless. She came to live in one of our homes, and she didn't know how to set any bills up. She didn't know how to change her council tax. She didn't know how to vote to register, to register for this service or that service. So I think that really sort of challenged our assumptions as well about what we thought new tenants would be, sort of new tenants who required support. We didn't think it would be affecting older people, but I think it's sort of, again, it's that assumptions, isn't it, that people are people and you just don't know what their circumstances are. But I think there's some amazing organisations out there that do work, and it's ensuring that people are aware of those. And it's about, I suppose, normalising, in some respects, the use of food clubs, so people don't feel it's a stigma. Whether you believe food clubs should exist or food banks should exist is a whole kind of political conversation. But ultimately, there are lots of people who struggle. So it's about accessing those services without any stigma attached.
Couldn't agree more. Susan, I'm going to bring you in. Good to have you with us today. Susan, are you there? can't hear you. Come back to you in just a second. Hopefully we can try and fix your mic issue. A point I guess I'd had come up just while we're trying to get Susan back with us. Do you feel, I mean, today's topic, how better two-way engagement can help you identify changing needs in older people's housing. One of the biggest changes, regardless of any age over the last few years, was the pandemic. Was, I guess, the way we engage with each other, the ways that we collaborate with each other, the willingness to go online with a lot more that we do, etc. Do you feel that there's been a shift in how you're having to deal with things like loneliness and isolation over the last few years from an engagement perspective with residents? Have you seen a shift at all, I guess, either in mentality or in the ways that, you've had to work as a housing business to sometimes try and highlight some of those? Because, I mean, we're doing a roundtable coming up with a Let's Call next week after, on unexplained tenant deaths and surprise tenant deaths and those kind of things, and not knowing what's going on. Undiscovered tenant deaths was the term I was trying to think of. So, and this is unfortunately a growing epidemic in and of itself. So, yeah, I guess my discussion point with yourself and ForHousing about what you're doing or what you've heard maybe the market is doing around isolation and loneliness at the moment, particularly, I guess, within older people's services.
Yeah, I think we've seen a shift in how people behave since the pandemic. So places that had communal settings which were quite vibrant, had lots of people attend, has changed. That's not across the board. All depends on the individuals who live there. And actually during the pandemic, we had to lock away furniture to stop people getting together when we weren't allowed to get together because they weren't following the rules, which was a challenge in itself. I think there are some people who are still quite fearful, although, I mean, the pandemic itself is over in regard to how we responded to it. I mean, ultimately, COVID will be here forever, but, sort of what we did at that time. I think that during the pandemic, we responded, as everybody did, sort of knee-jerk, because it was an ever-changing picture. So we enhanced our communication. We changed the way we talk to people. I think in hindsight, that has created far greater dependency for some people who prior to the pandemic were very independent. That becomes a challenge in itself, because you may have somebody who you would only see once every couple of weeks now wanting to talk to you every single day. So I think that's difficult. I think that, especially obviously following Peabody, etc., I suppose it's a scary prospect, isn't it, that some people don't have anybody in their life to know that somebody could pass away for, that long and not have any interaction. I think it's a terrifying thought, isn't it, as a human being, that you have that limited interaction. I mean, from our perspective, we do welfare checks Monday to Friday. We are working to enhance that 7 days a week, because I think that, ultimately lots of things happen on a weekend and a bank holiday. So why aren't we doing that 7 days a week? So I think that there's a lot about ensuring that how do we know that people are safe and well if they don't have anybody in their lives? Some people are very lucky enough to have families, some people aren't. The challenge is, and I suppose this is where as an organisation we're trying to use insights of data about those people who never contact us. Well, again, regardless of age, if I'm honest. So how do we know those people who never engage with us? And I don't necessarily mean about talk to us, just generally about reporting a repair, or who are the people that we have to get a warrant for doing the gas safety on an annual basis. How do we sort of pick up that kind of relationship building, rather than leaving it until maybe a tragedy occurs? And I think that's I think it's a challenge for the whole sector, really, about how do you support somebody to know they're safe and well without intruding in their lives?
Yeah,
because there's that really fine balance as well, isn't there, between both? So let's say I'm working at the minute to, like I say, enhance our welfare checks, because I think that's a real sort of, I suppose, bone of contention. But again, going back to everybody's an individual and people are people, we have residents who live who don't want to have anything to do with our service, although it's there and it's part, they pay for it, it's there, and choose not to do that. So there's a real risk there that although we have a service offer, we do not see those people from basically for 12 months because they don't want to talk to us. No, it's not about even engaging. They just don't want to talk to us because they just want to live their lives and get on with it. So I think there's something about having measures in place that you can sort of say that you've done the best you can. And I think, you know, at a minimum, everybody who's got a gas boiler will have somebody go in their home annually.
And another thing, I'm going to try to bring Susan back in. Susan, can you hear us? Have we got you now?
Oh, it's me.
Wonderful. Yes. Oh no, you've muted. Yeah, we've got you back.
Right. I was having problems with my system, so I put it in chat that we don't necessarily ask people about their finances when we're having a group meeting, but I will say to people that if you can support the social supermarket, because for the money it costs you, which is very little anyway, that money goes towards covering the cost of those who actually do need it free and have access to the food bank. The one only survives by the other being used. And so that's encouraged people that thought they actually didn't need help, but actually did. But again, it's a stigma. They don't like to think that they need to go, and they're worried about people seeing them go to the social supermarket shop as well. But once you've actually been once, believe me, your stigma, it literally, I was the same. I didn't go for a couple of years because I was frightened. So many people knew who I was. And I don't even worry about it now. Nobody's ever recognised me when I've walked in the shop. I don't know why. I actually was so, worried about it. So anyway.
And I think it's one of those, isn't it, where it's very easy for...
I think it's in your mind, isn't it? It's rather than what everybody else is thinking. It's what you have perceived yourself. Sorry, I didn't.
No, please, no. It's a really important point. I think when you're thinking about engagement and speaking with, you know, any service, never mind other people's services, whatever, it's not just the stigma you as a housing association or maybe your staff have, maybe in terms of supporting people in the work we're trying to do there. It's sometimes the stigma or self-stigma, self-perception that people might have in terms of accessing services that you're trying to offer and how that might be perceived is a really important part of the whole process, and something which sometimes I guess gets overlooked by some housing providers who, you know, are going, well, why don't you access this, you know, and thinking about maybe how it's framed and access and those kind of points. And Kelly, I know you and I have spoken, you know, I'd had a client I'd worked with who there was a resident who was completely unwilling to use banking services and wouldn't set up a direct debit despite the savings because the lack of trust in the bank and other things that went with it. And it's amazing that these things do still it's not amazing these things persist. These things have persisted for a reason and they've come from somewhere. So it's how we're delivering those in and how we're looking at options for people when support is needed, and trying to make that stuff less scary, unless, as Susan's rightly mentioned, you know, it's self-perceived.
I actually supported a lady who got extreme mental health problems, and she had got financial dire straits. And I got to say, I was able to successfully get her access to, at the time, Severn Trent Water at local water authority were doing grants to cover things related to water. And I filled out the form, but it took me 2 months to fill out because we could only do so many questions each week because she couldn't cope. But once I realised she wasn't coping with the number of questions I was asking her, I went at her pace, even though we could have actually removed her debts 2 months earlier if she'd have been. But it was actually taking it at their pace. And that's something else I think people forget with older generation, that you have to treat every person at their pace. if you're, I know you've got time and you've got constraints and that, but you can't go in like a bulldozer if they can't process stuff in that time frame. You've got to give them the space to be able, otherwise they don't engage and you lose them. So that's it.
But as Kelly pointed out, it's also then that balance of going, well, actually, if somebody is picking things up quickly, be willing to kind of go, well, brilliant, let's go. It's getting rid of that stigma completely, isn't it, Kelly?
Yeah.
I think it's that person-centered, tenant-focused approach, isn't it? You know, like I say, not everybody is the same. So what you do with Betty is not the same as you do with Joan or John or whoever it is. And actually, I'm sure that sense of achievement that lady would have had working with you, Susan, to complete that form, even if it did take 2 months, is far greater than her disengaging because those persistent, trying to answer all those persistent questions. And I think that's easily forgotten sometimes. It's something that might be really straightforward or, simple to you or I, might not be for an individual for a variety of reasons.
Well, actually, after I helped her with that, I then got all the information I needed, anything else we needed to do. So all I needed was her signature. And so I would tell her what I was doing, but you could see she was just complete. I mean, she had got severe mental health issues and she was happy for me to do things for her. And which she actually got all sorts of wonderful things to help her life. But because I took that time on that first one, I could fill out any application form for her and just get her signature. And she never got turned down for anything because I took that time on that very first one for her.
And it comes down to that trust, doesn't it? I remember speaking to a resident who, I think he was 58 or something and happened to be in an older people services. Going back to Kelly's point earlier, and they were, he was living in a scheme, all going very well. It was actually a lot of younger, older people, if that makes sense. Everyone was great, but suddenly the housing provider changed a bit of the tenure and started putting people from other tenures in, and suddenly had people with like severe mental health needs in the same block because they were also older people. And it's kind of going down that route of going, well, actually, just because you're older, that isn't a one thing. I think it goes back to the point made very early on. Older people isn't suddenly like, right, well, that's it, everybody is now in this box. It's so diverse, and yet, especially when older people services start at over 55s, that in itself is 2 generations, and we're lumping into older people. It's a little bit wild, really. Emma had mentioned in the chat that they have lots of examples of how their alert call service has had a positive impact, especially with our daily contact service. I know it's something that you use yourself, Kelly. And Nigel had mentioned about some fire safety stuff, which Nigel on Thursday's roundtable we're actually discussing fire safety, so I'm sure we'll come back to that. Janina said, we promote use of the social supermarkets locally from a sustainability point of view, which many were set up originally from the basis of reducing food waste. It helps remove that stigma. We highlight the saving money approach as a win-win bonus, not always the main aim. And via our money advice service, we often find people with a change of circumstance don't know about benefits or what they can claim, as they've not had that previous experience. We now have minimum of a quarterly focus on support services via all our comms and newsletters as a roundup. James, I was going to bring you back in, but we're kind of running out of time, and I want to pass to Kelly for final thoughts and ideas that you'd like to share. So Kelly, over to you to wrap up today's session.
Thanks. Obviously, firstly, thank you all for coming. I hope you found it useful. I think my probably key point to take away is that everybody's an individual. So when you're considering any kind of either communication or engagement strategy or listening or any interaction, it's about understanding that individual that you are actually trying to talk to. And, language is key. So, apart from your standard respectfulness and, treat people as how you would expect to be treated, I think not using jargon, making sure that everything's clear, simple, and like I say, deliver on your promises, because otherwise you'll lose the trust of that individual. And that will go around, I think, conversations with friends, with colleagues and friends within sort of neighbourhoods very, very quickly. So if you want to ensure that sort of you have that trustful, meaningful relationship with not just older people, but I think all, anybody that you interact with, you need to deliver on your promises and treat people as individuals.
And it's that trust and realizing actually, sometimes being humble enough to go, actually, if we've lost the trust, we have to earn this back. It shouldn't just be a given. Kelly, thank you so much for bringing that to the table today. As mentioned, we are having a couple of weeks now where we're doing 2 sessions a week. So this Thursday, we are doing one on fire safety. We're going to be doing a deep dive into that. Next Tuesday, Stuart Davison joined us to talk about rethinking technology's role in social housing leadership and governance. And then we've got a Alertical Live roundtable in Birmingham discussing, as I said, tenant deaths. Just a quick plug as well, in 2 weeks' time, Rick Blakeway, the Ombudsman, is coming onto the roundtable. I don't quite know how this has happened either, but he will be talking about ensuring compliance with the code. So lots and lots to get involved in. If you'd like to join the mailing list or anything, do reach out. But for now, a massive thank you to Kelly and to Alertical for sponsoring today, and we'll no doubt see you all soon. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Not just older people, but I think all, anybody that you interact with, you need to deliver on your promises and treat people as individuals.
And it's that trust and realizing actually, sometimes being humble enough to go, actually, if we've lost the trust, we have to earn this back. It shouldn't just be a given. Kelly, thank you so much for bringing that to the table today. As mentioned, we are having a couple of weeks now where we're doing 2 sessions a week. So this Thursday, we are doing one on fire safety. We're going to be doing a deep dive into that. Next Tuesday, Stuart Davison joined us to talk about rethinking technology's role in social housing leadership and governance. And then we've got a Alertical Live roundtable in Birmingham discussing, as I said, tenant deaths. Just a quick plug as well, in 2 weeks' time, Rick Blakeway, the Ombudsman, is coming onto the roundtable. I don't quite know how this has happened either, but he will be talking about ensuring compliance with the code. So lots and lots to get involved in. If you'd like to join the mailing list or anything, do reach out. But for now, a massive thank you to Kelly and to Alertical for sponsoring today, and we'll no doubt see you all soon. Thank you, everybody.